Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. That was our bell. I'm President Steve Chevalier, a director at Zilber Limited and a board member at the Zilber Family Foundation. As we gather virtually today for our 9th virtual meeting in our 107-year history, we'll continue our tradition of reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now Michael Shepard, managing partner of Ironwood Drive Financial Group, will give our invocation.
Thank you. For today's reflection and our upcoming Memorial Day holiday, I would like to honor our men and women who have died while serving in the military, those who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. I would also like to highlight all who are currently serving to keep us safe, and that extends to our nurses, first responders, doctors, and innovators guiding us out of this crisis. While this holiday typically symbolizes the start to summer, where we usually have parades and large gatherings, embracing each other in joy, our new normal may not allow that. However, I would like to point out a positive. As you may know, Monday is also International Towel Day. So I ask that you all join me in grabbing your favorite towel, beach size if you may, put that towel in the dryer, select quick dry, 10 minutes minimum. And when you hear that beep, embrace the warmth of that towel, smile, and realize that our future will be brighter than our present. Enjoy the meeting.
Well done, Michael. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everybody to the joint program with the Harvard and Kellogg Business School Alumni Clubs. Thank you for all joining us today. And also thanks to Dan Vliet and Mary Edwards for their Thursday snack program about returning to work last week. This program is now up on our YouTube channel, so check it out and feel free to share it with your friends. They can see the video at any time. This Thursday, we're going to welcome Larry Barton, CEO of Strang Inc., who will provide some additional guidance on getting back to work safely. And thank you to Matt Matson, Rotarian Matt Matson, for helping us arrange that speaker. Also, as a reminder, Rotary and the Florentine Opera are hosting the Quarantine Opera Book Club on Wednesday at 5 p.m. A cocktail idea is provided as well. I think you have to provide your own liquor, of course. This week, the opera is The Tales of Hoffmann, composed by Jacques Offenbach. You may know him as the composer of Can-Can. If you'd like to join, email Michelle or visit the link in this morning's email. And of course, our Harvard and Kellogg friends are welcome to join as well. We encourage you to invite your family, friends, and colleagues to our virtual meetings, both regular Tuesday and our snack meetings on Wednesdays or Thursdays. It only takes a minute to forward our weekly connecting email with our Tuesday links. and they have links to these additional connector programs. And of course, our link on Friday morning will also give that to you. The Harvard and Kellogg friends are welcome to join that as well. Rotarians recently received a letter from us inviting them and are asking them to support Rotary's movement to end polio, and thereby supporting our worldwide efforts to arrest the spread of COVID-19 as well. I'm very excited to tell you that we've exceeded $12,000 so far in donations. Thanks to all of you who've done that. We're very close to our match for the $12,500 dollar for dollar match from the Zilbert Family Foundation. And don't forget that the Gates Foundation will also double that match. So every dollar becomes $4. So we're very close to getting this done. So please contribute what you can. We're almost there. We'd like to end this program by May 22nd, and we'd like to exceed the $12,500 match to make our club proud. Finally, before we turn over to our speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the Q&A. As I have in the past, we're going to use the chat function on Zoom. So please type in your question, hit enter, and Mary, as the moderator at that point, will attempt to address all the questions that are supplied. And now, Bill Levitt, arbitrator and mediator with Levitt ADR LLC, will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, President Steve. Fellow Rotarians, Harvard and Kellogg alums, and other guests who might be zooming into this meeting or catching it on YouTube. It is my pleasure to introduce my former colleague and for a longtime friend, David Villa. And in doing so, it reminded me of a story that may be more apocryphal than true, but had some currency when I was at the Harvard Law School, and that was the then Dean Erwin Griswold introduced one of the well-known professors, James Kastner, who was noted for his somewhat acerbic wit, and he took umbrage at something Griswold said and said, "Thank you, Dean Griswold, the only man who's so smart he doesn't need a personality." Well, I have to say about David that he is one of the smartest, most intelligent people I've ever had the opportunity to encounter and, for that matter, work with. But unlike how Kastner described Griswold, David has a very engaging personality, as I think you will find. He is a New Mexico native, graduate of Princeton, has a master's in economics and Latin American history from Stanford, and an MBA from Kellogg. He's also a chartered financial analyst. Until he jumped to the public sector, which I'll get to in a moment, his professional career was in Chicago. He worked with Arthur Andersen, First Chicago, Brinson and Partners, with money management firm, which then became part of UBS Global Asset Management, where David was until he decided to become the chief investment officer of the Florida analog of SWIB. And then in 2006, in my capacity as a SWIB trustee, I had the good fortune to be able to interview and be involved in the recruitment of David to become the first chief investment officer of SWIB. Up until that time, they hadn't had but such a position. And David has brought an amazing level of rigor and analytics to the agency, and in addition, has been instrumental in the establishment of a world-class management information system. So without more, I'm happy to introduce David. And then, as Steve pointed out, when he is finished through the chat function, you will be able to have a Q&A, which Mary McCormick will administer. Thank you.
All right, that's my cue.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an honor to be participating in your webcast today. Bill, it's great to see you again. And your effort to recruit me from Florida to Wisconsin may seem odd to some of my friends in New Mexico, but I've loved being there, and it really changed my life. looking after the collateral that collateralizes a promise that allows about 640,000 employees to retire in dignity. So I have a presentation today. I'm going to try to go through it rather quickly so that we can get to the Q&A. And the takeaway is that large institutional investors should invest for the long term, but we're going to have a really challenging 3 years ahead of us. So this first slide provides a best, base, and worst case for the stock market over the next several years.
Excuse me,
And-
David, I don't think you're sharing your screen. You're good.
Okay, so the at the top, I have a slide for the best case. And in the best case, it takes 12 months to develop a vaccine and therapy. In the base case, it takes 12 to 24 months to develop a vaccine and therapy. And then in 24 to 36 months, that's the worst case. And it takes 24 months to 36 months to develop a vaccine and therapy. And the appetite for extreme physical and monetary stimulus fades away. So just to indicate the stress in each case, I put a rough estimate of defaults. In the best case, defaults are 10%. This is for speculative debt. So the speculative debt defaults would be 10% in the best case, 15% in the base case, and 20% in the worst case. So we have quite a wide dispersion of results. This slide just plots our model results for earnings for the stock market. The green line is the best case. This is built off of consensus, and we have reduced the consensus estimates. So we believe the best case is a wildly optimistic scenario. And you see in 2022, earnings are back at around $55. In the worst case, we have 2 years of decline. And in 2022, we have earnings at $70. And then in the base case, we have 1 year decline and then a rebound, and earnings are $90. Again, a very, very wide dispersion, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of volatility. And the blue line is the great financial crisis. It indicates how earnings performed in the great financial crisis. And you'll see that in the great financial crisis, earnings rebounded back to a fairly high level in just 2 years. So in the base case and the worst case, it's taking much longer for the economy to recover. This is a slide of our model that links Fed behavior with earnings. When earnings fall, interest rates fall. When earnings go up, when earnings go up, interest rates go up. So this is a core assumption in this modeling, that the Fed behaves rationally and links its policy response to the broad economy and earnings, how they perform. Here you'll see that in 2024, under the best case, the risk-free cash rate is 1.5%. In the base case, it is 60 basis points. And in the worst case, it's 15 basis points in 2024. And then we show the great financial crisis in blue. And there you'll just see a extremely long period of what we call a tax on large real money investors and financial repression as interest rates stayed long for a very long time, but it puts this in context. Now, this is a very important slide because what we're attempting to do is to demonstrate that investors tend to focus a lot on what happens in the next 5 years, or what we learn in graduate school is a period of growth to normal. Now, that period depends on the firm and the investment philosophy and the process. Sometimes it can be 3 years, sometimes it can be 5 years, and at some firms it's longer than 5 years. But here we're using 5 years. So we've broken the present value, or the value of a dollar today, even though that dollar is received at some point in the future, and broken that into 4 buckets. There's 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11, 30 years, and then 31 years to infinity. And we demonstrate that a very small percentage of the intrinsic value actually comes from the first 5 years. It's very important to understand how earnings are going to evolve beyond the 5-year period. So what will the level of earnings be in year 6, and what will the trend growth rate be? We tend to think of that in terms of return on invested capital, return on equity, and margins. But the takeaway is that you should not overreact to this crisis as a real money institutional investor. You should not de-risk. It is hard to time the market, and you should stick to your policy. The most important thing you can do is to build a robust policy portfolio, rebalance, and stick to that policy. So I'm going to next show you the policy portfolio solution that we use at SWIB. And Bill Levitt was on the board and instrumental in helping us work through the governance issues that were related to this. So first I have a slide with the 1-year return on the horizontal axis. So you'll see it goes from -20 to 20. That's a pretty wide range of returns for the 1-year performance, but it's reasonable. And the vertical axis is the 5-year return that we would have at the end of 2020, or in December 31st of 2020, depending on what the 1-year return was. So at the end of March, the core trust fund return was about -12%. I think it was -11.5%. And the 5-year return would have been 5.5%. Now, it's really important to explain that the Wisconsin retirement system does not have a traditional pension plan. The Wisconsin retirement system is actually an insurance scheme that provides a product that most people would consider a variable participating annuity. So the beneficiaries share in the upside and the downside of investment performance, but their initial benefit, which they receive when they retired, is guaranteed and it's protected. So the inflation protection, or the inflation index, is not part of the formula. It has to be earned with investment performance. So we would say there is no cost of living adjustment, and any adjustments, which we can call annuity adjustments, bonuses, or dividends, needs to be earned. And we can reduce those accumulative adjustments anytime the return is below 5.5%. So the risk is shared. There's a very, very deep alignment of interest across all the constituents, the legislative branch, the executive branch of government, local municipalities, the employers, the taxpayers, and the beneficiaries, because they all have a dog in the hunt. So today the return is about minus 5.5. So we've moved to the right and at negative 5.5. So our return is now expected to be somewhere close to 7% if we were to finish the year with no more variation in the performance to date. And our hope, of course, is to get back to zero. The other thing to point out is that the distribution of these dots has widened a lot. I gave a presentation to the CFA Society in January, and the dots were on the right in that blue area. Today, the dots are over to the green and the red, and that demonstrates that expectations have declined. So that was my opportunity to talk a little bit about how the benefit works, which is almost unique in the United States. And it's one of the main reasons that the Wisconsin retirement system is fully funded and considered one of the best run pension plans in the country. This is our base case investment expectations. I just want to draw your attention to the second stack of bars, which are titled equity. And on the right is our equilibrium view. And in the equilibrium view, there's a white area, which we call that the excess spread. We can't explain it very well. And then the gray area is the term premium. That historically has been 1.7% for equity. And then we have the cash return, which has been 2.5%. So if you look at the bar to the left, you'll see that those have almost disappeared. So today, as an equity investor, you're getting a very reasonable risk premium, but you're being taxed horribly by this financial repression and fear and just the huge supply of liquidity that is in the marketplace. Now, this is a base case, and these bar charts vary a lot between the cases. But as I showed you on this slide, the value of the equity market doesn't change very much, regardless of which case we use. So this is the policy solution for the state of Wisconsin retirement system that we use in the core trust fund. And I have the December 31 policy weights that were in place, and I'm using the investment expectations that were used in December of 2019. So you'll see public equity, the weight is 55.3%. If you go down, you'll see that there is no economic leverage, there is no policy leverage. And then towards the bottom, you'll see that the expected 5 to 7 year return is 6.3%. That is below our 7% target. Our expected policy risk is 12.3%. And the distribution of equity and fixed income between the equity and fixed income factors. So this is taking the asset allocation and breaking out the factors to measure our exposure to risky assets and fixed income assets, is 66.34%. And equities contribute 91% to the variance or the variability of the returns, the investment returns. After the great financial crisis, we studied this, and we became very, very sensitive to the risk sharing of the constituent groups. And we reduced benefits for some of the oldest retirees materially, right at the time when their wealth was declining the most. So in 2019, we put in place a policy solution which provides better diversification, but it uses leverage. So you'll see the equity weight and fixed income weights have changed. The inflation sensitive weight is much higher because that's a big risk for us. Remember, we have no cost of living adjustment. We have to earn it. And inflation is not a friend, especially at high rates. Multi-asset, we can think of that as investing in between the cracks on an opportunistic basis. Real estate has doubled, and private equity has increased about 50%. But now you see 5.5% economic leverage. That's the leverage that we use to create an alpha beta overlay with our hedge fund portfolio. And the policy leverage is a leverage we use to basically buy the policy portfolio and move the assets exposure, the gross exposure, to be higher. So you'll see the expected policy return is 6.2%, and the expected policy risk is 11.5%. So we've given up 10 basis points of return. Now that doesn't worry us a lot because we've increased our budget for active risk, and our target for our active risk contribution has gone from 40 basis points to 60 or 70 basis points. So if we take the return we're trying to achieve from our active risk, we manage about half of the assets in-house, so we have a very large cost advantage in generating value added above the benchmarks. Our return today is expected to be 6.8, 6.9%, which is very close to the target. And you'll also see that the policy risk has declined from 12.3% to 11.5%. So we're giving up 10 basis points of return, but we're gaining 100 basis points in lower variability of that return. And you'll also see that the equity fixed income factor allocation is 64-46. So in fact, the equity allocation is almost the same. Remember, we've increased our private equity, and we think of private equity as the equivalent of public equity with a supercharger or turbocharged, or sometimes we say it's public equity on steroids. So we don't think our equity exposure is that different than it was in 2009, but our fixed income allocation has gone from 34 to 46%. So we have a lot more fixed income in the portfolio. And again, even though the fixed income asset classes are very, very expensive, we have the ability to strip out the duration return and port that on top of other fixed income asset classes or the equity asset class. And you'll see the contribution to variability of the returns has gone, the variability of returns from equities has gone from 91% to 84%. So this is, and I apologize for this kind of technical presentation. This is a presentation of a CIO that's been working as a CIO since 2004. I've been the executive director since October of 2019. So if there was a different executive director here, you would be shown the next set of slides. So I hope there are still people on the call. So I want to talk to you about the simple math of pensions. I am just puzzled, flabbergasted, and I fail to understand what is so hard about understanding this. And many times I get invited to talk about this. I talk about it and then I'm never invited back. So I apologize in advance. On the left, we have a fully funded plan. Let's assume that's the Wisconsin retirement system. The Wisconsin retirement system collects contributions, which in effect are the premiums for insurance, which is promised, and it takes the form of a participating annuity. 75% of the cost to collateralize the promise come from investment returns. Now, a fund that is underfunded has probably not made all the contributions. Take the state that is to the right of us on the map. And so they have a funding deficit. There is no way that that funding deficit can be made up with investment returns because they're not earning the investment return on 100% of the assets. They're only earning the investment return on 65% of the assets. So at the end of the day, the cost of that pension plan has gone from 25% to 51%. It is doubled. And if you take the decrease in funding, which is at the bottom of the page, from 25% minus the 16%, that's a change, it's a reduction of 9%. But the cost increases from 25% to 51%, a 26% increase. As a result, if you're going to defer $1 of contributions, you are going to increase your cost by $3. That's third grade math. So I am really puzzled why the governance structures in other states do not understand this. And I worry a lot that the workers are going to suffer greatly in the other states. I'm going to compare the other states to Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, our net investment income covers about 79% of the cost or the funding, more than 75%. The average public pension generates 62%. In Wisconsin, state and local governments spend 2% of their budgets on public pensions. The national average is 4.7%. And there are no general taxes that support the WRS. The WRS pays $5.6 billion in benefits. It paid $5.6 billion in benefits in 2018. 85% of those benefits go to pensioners who retire and they live in Wisconsin. So most of those benefits, the dollars, stay in Wisconsin. And at the bottom, I'm going to skip the middle and just go to the bottom and say, this is one of the factors that we hear is contributing to our credit rating and lower borrowing costs. So now I'm going to skate over into the Wisconsin venture capital portfolio, which I think some members of the audience are very keen to talk about. So the SWIB created a portfolio in 1999, and we have invested, we've committed about $400 million into Wisconsin-focused venture capital. Now, we allow some of these general partners to fish outside of Wisconsin, so they might look at Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, but we've really tried hard to find GPs who will focus on Wisconsin. In the early days in 1999, we had several GPs which disappointed us, and we had to start over and find new GPs. There's about $200 million of institutional quality supply of venture capital investments in the state. And we invest in about 20 million of that, which is about 10% of the institutional opportunities throughout the state. And we're also involved in local activities where we try to link Wisconsin startups with the venture capital GPs that we work with outside the state, especially in Silicon Valley and Boston. And we try to promote the Wisconsin startup ecosystem to investors outside of the state. Not on this page, two things. One is that the Wisconsin retirement system and WARF, the tech transfer arm of the university, partnered together to create a new venture capital general partner in Wisconsin. It's called 4490. That is the geographic center of the state of Wisconsin. And it's been going for several years, and we've committed to fund 3 funds. And we're hopeful that that will become one of the anchor venture capital firms that we work with. I have 2 companies here on the next page. that we have invested in. New Wave Medical and SWIB support helped to create a lasting Wisconsin company while generating good risk-adjusted returns for the WRS. So we call that a double bottom line. It was good for Wisconsin and it was good for the beneficiaries. We also have Pinstripe. This is an investment that we made in a company that was founded by 2 women. And today, this is called Cielo, and it is a world-leading strategic RPO company located in over 95 companies with over 2,000 employees. And again, we helped create this company while generating good risk-adjusted returns for the WRS. So another double bottom line win. The private debt portfolio that was started in the 1960s, that portfolio has invested over $2.1 billion. Over 90% of the loans go to companies that are headquartered in Wisconsin. And the proceeds tend to be for growth and capacity expansion or recapitalizations that are positive for the company, employment, and local companies. We're very, very sensitive to recapitalizations that allow the founders to extract the wealth out of the company. So from time to time, we'll have rather challenging conversations with the leadership of companies, but because it's hard for them to understand why we won't fund the loan. And many times it's not because of the risk, it's because we are not attracted to funding the recapitalization that allows the entrepreneur or the founder or the owner to take the intrinsic value out of the company. And then the average loan pacing is about 100 million and the average loan size is about 10 million. And we have 2 investments as examples. One is City Forest. This goes back to the exciting Enron days. This was a company that was bought by Enron, and then Enron went bankrupt, and the company was afraid that it was going to go bankrupt. We came in and we bought the debt at pennies on the dollar. And then we helped the company, City Forest, get back on its feet and become viable. And then Wisconsin Whey Protein. This is a company that wanted to expand. It makes cheese and it has a byproduct, a whey byproduct, which has several uses. And so we have helped them underwrite the capital expenditures to fund that expansion. And then on governance, I just want to recognize Bill and the past trustees and the current trustees. They have been the best board that I know. They are supportive. They had a strategy in 2005, which resulted in Bill Levitt recruiting me to Wisconsin. And they have been completely committed to that strategy. And we have been working hard to tidy up the last elements of that, which provides investment management services that are very sophisticated and a very sophisticated infrastructure. And the benefit of that goes mostly to the beneficiaries and the taxpayers, not to the asset managers in New York on Wall Street. And I'm going to stop there and take questions.
David, that was really very, very informative and a little complicated in places, but I think you did a very good job of explaining some very complicated issues. So I'm going to pull up the chat here and see what comes up. I do have one question that was submitted in advance, or a few here, but what defines success for SWIB in addition to risk and total return?
Well, our mission is to manage the collateral for a promise that is made to 640,000 public employees. And that promise allows them to retire in dignity. So that's our mission. The results that we need define success. And the results that we need are a high risk-adjusted Sharpe ratio. So the policy portfolio needs to have a high return to risk payoff. And the excess return, or the value added, or what you hear referred to as alpha, needs to have a very high information ratio. Again, that's risk adjusted. But that's not the only measure of success and the results. We need to build a complicated, sophisticated policy portfolio that is well diversified with leverage, and we need a very sophisticated 21st century infrastructure that allows us to process these trades, which we find in between the cracks. So they're quite complicated. And that allows us to have risk management information with very high frequency, often on a daily basis. So success is a combination of investment performance defined in a risk return framework and building a sophisticated infrastructure. So as a result, we invest a lot in investment professionals and investment services staff. You'll see, usually around February, you'll see an article. It's now down to one article because the press has been starved of resources, but you'll see at least one article about the bonuses we pay. And the reporter will go to a bar and say, Joe, what do you think about these bonuses that SWIB gets in Madison? And they'll say, I'm outraged. But we kind of grin and bear it. We know it's going to come every year. The board is extremely supportive because, in fact, over the time that I have been at SWIB, I believe we've added over we've added over $1.5 billion in savings because of our platform and investments we make in the staff in Wisconsin. So talent acquisition, talent retention is also important to success.
Terrific, thank you. I can see that people have been really looking at the slides, David, and I guess this is also a good time to mention that the slides will be available to everyone. They will be part of the email that goes out at the end of this presentation with the survey. So you'll be able to look back on them. But a couple of people noticed that the EQ over FI factor allocation is 110% and wonder how that can be.
Because we use leverage. Our gross investments are now actually 115.5%, not 100%. So we use leverage to become more diversified by buying the fixed income and having a portable alpha overlay. Bill went through this process. It took us 3 years to work through all the issues with the constituent groups and convince them that this was a additive strategy, that it was a good strategy, and it has in fact been a value-added strategy. So I didn't call out the leverage. I apologize for not doing that, other than saying there were now 2 lines. One is financial leverage and the other is economic leverage.
Terrific. And I think you just referenced this, but one of the questions is, what input does the SWIB board have on investment strategy?
Well, we review the investment strategies with the investment committee. I chair the investment committee, and so I in fact approve the investment strategies for the individual components of the policy portfolio, but the board approves the asset allocation. So we meet in October with our consultants and sometimes with our actuary, and the staff present probably a number of asset allocation solutions. The head of asset and risk allocation and myself will select one of them and propose that as the solution if we want to make a change. And then the board approves or they do not approve the asset allocation. Once the asset allocation is approved, then they delegate the authority to me to implement the policy portfolio. So my decisions relate to, do we use active or passive strategies or solutions, vehicles? Do we use internally managed or externally managed? Do we move the risk to traditional strategies, or do we move the active risk to more of a hedge fund solution?
Well, this might be a follow-up question, and some of this is my naivete. I'm not quite sure I understand. Can you discuss the rationale behind committing to a single manager in 4490 versus a portfolio of managers?
Well, we have a portfolio of managers. So we have a portfolio of many managers. So we don't see it as a concentration issue.
She's asking why you established 4490.
So the reason we established 4490 is because we were being asked to invest more in Wisconsin, and we were having a lot of difficulty finding institutional quality asset managers that we were comfortable allocating to in the context of a real money institutional portfolio. And the likelihood of success is very low. The fees are very high. And we wanted to bring an investor from Silicon Valley and locate them in Madison to help strengthen the ecosystem in Madison. There are more managers in Milwaukee, obviously, than there are, but that was a strategy to be able to commit funds and work with our Silicon Valley partners to support investments in Wisconsin. And we just don't see a conflict in terms of committing to a single manager because we have a portfolio of mini managers.
Okay. I'm going to go back up here. Our president, Steve, had a question. He noted in one of the slides that the 6.8% return mentioned, but the slide showed 6.2%. Can you explain that a little bit?
The difference is the active return from our active risk. So remember, I can allocate the capital that is carved out in the policy portfolio to active strategies or passive strategies. If I allocate everything to passive strategies, the return will be 6.2%. But if I allocate to active strategies, my long-term information ratio is about 75 basis points, which is extremely high. Compared to other pension plans, it's off the chart high. So in the last 2 years, because we're only getting 6.2 from the policy portfolio, we're allocating to more active managers, including external managers, but also we're allocating larger amounts of capital to our internal managers. The conversation about active risk and the risk budget and the way we manage the risk, how we allocate, is another presentation. So I didn't develop that concept, but that the 6.2 versus 6.8 is 60 basis points of return from active risk, and the risk is 1.2%.
We know that this is the Wisconsin Investment Board and represents state employees. What other local governments or first responders, what other entities or retirees are taken care of in your system?
Well, it's almost all the retirees for local municipalities, counties, the state, the hospital, the university system. And I believe I explain it when I'm out on the road that we're managing the collateral for all the public employees in Wisconsin, except for the city and county of Milwaukee.
Thank you. Okay. Here's a question from an entrepreneur on our YouTube channel. How can an entrepreneur work toward a financial partnership with SWIB, as was shown in a couple of the examples that you put on your slides? What is the criteria for a partnership?
Well, Chris Prestigiacomo is the portfolio manager for both the venture capital portfolio and the private debt portfolio. So Chris is responsible for developing relationships. So he actually comes to Milwaukee from time to time to meet owners and entrepreneurs. And Greg at 4490 and Dan at 4490 are also touch points which people can make. I think reaching out to Greg and Dan is probably more productive than reaching out to Chris, because Chris is probably going to call one of his venture capital GPs to get a view and an opinion on the assets or the opportunity. Whereas Greg, he's deeply rooted in Silicon Valley, and he gets to his answer fairly quickly and in an informed basis. So I would encourage people to reach out to Chris. It's a problem if I get feedback that he's not reaching out or he's hard to deal with. That has come up a few times. So I would hope that is easy to do today.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. You know, and we do talk a bit about this early stage capital availability in Wisconsin. And just as someone who thinks a lot, I would imagine, about the economy of Wisconsin, do you have a sense of whether we'd be better off with more early stage capital, and whether there are other strategies for developing that capital other than looking to institutional investors such as SWIB?
Well, I think Oshkosh and Northwest Mutual, they're already in the game, but and Epic is in the game a bit. Harley Davidson, they have financial issues, but the state would be way better off if we had a larger pool of capital to support venture capital in early stage. I think it's a mistake to just look at SWIB as the kind of a pot of money, because it's really then becomes a goose that lays a golden egg. I think the question is really, what do we need to foment the venture capital ecosystem? You need CEOs. You need experienced CEOs. So back when I was first looking at this in 2007, someone explained to me, a local entrepreneur who had made several investments, said, David, the difference between an entrepreneur at Stanford and Wisconsin is the following. The entrepreneur at Stanford is a computer scientist at the university who is receiving a lot of support from the university and the ecosystem, and has a very friendly tech transfer arrangement. And they've already failed 3 times running companies, and they're on their 4th company. An entrepreneur in Wisconsin is the son of a dairy farmer, and they're going to give him the dairy farm. So now that was hyperbole. And I think we can recruit CEOs to Wisconsin, and we have very talented people in Wisconsin, but you need CEOs. That's an important agreement. That's an important ingredient. We need the computer science department and the engineering departments in Wisconsin to be twice their current size. We probably need the healthcare systems, the research centers in Milwaukee and Madison to be much larger. So we need raw inputs to generate ideas for early stage startup companies. And then we need to be able to bring the most highly regarded venture capital firms to Wisconsin to co-invest with the local GPs, because they have access to best-in-class CEOs and technology and infrastructure, and they can really accelerate the sales process after you make your first sale. So it's something that would be a great benefit to Wisconsin to have, instead of 200 million, to have 300 million. But there are several elements to having a strategy to accomplish that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. This has really been a very informative and helpful presentation. So I think that we will have some virtual applause here, if we can, if you can hear that. And then I will thank you again, and then pass this back to President Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, for a very thoughtful presentation. It certainly opened up my eyes. And as Mary mentioned, there's a wonderful website for SWIB that has tons of information. As you probably know, David, Rotary has been a world leader in the efforts to eradicate polio. So in honor of your presentation today, and in thanks, we're going to purchase an additional 50 doses to help at least get rid of that pandemic, and perhaps help also with the COVID-19 structure. Again, see our screen for some of the upcoming virtual events. We have a lot going on. We have our coffee and beer connector groups that are back this Thursday, in addition to our snack program. The coffee connector will have a special guest on Thursday morning to tell us how to make a good coffee. So if you snooze, you lose, 7:30 on Thursday morning. Visit the links in the survey email after the meeting to register for our Thursday snack program or our connectors May 21st. Next week, our speaker will be Dr. Mark Markle, Dean of the UW-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Markle will discuss veterinary medicine and its impact on animal and human health, and provide an update on COVID-19. So that should be very interesting. So now let's go out and help somebody in our community if we can. Stay prudent as we start to reopen the state. This meeting is adjourned.